Hey people, this is part 5 of the Nephilim Giant series. It's the 6th movie coming up because I had stuck this movie on the number 7 in here where it came up in the first chapter here and it came up in the last chapter. I'm showing the differences. So I'm going to call this part 5. It might be the 6th in the line though. On that last movie of the 7s, Cousin Denny says there are also 7 major notes used in music. And I call him Cousin Denny because he's way past due for a haircut. No blood. And that's just something I forgot to mention, but yeah, they were fully aware of that. And you could see here that every planet was associated with a music note. And so this is Do here. You know, the C, Do, Re. And you see Mi is missing. It goes straight to Fa. Mi is the earth. Mi. Fa, So, La, and then T is Saturn. But after I posted part 4, I watched it and I noticed I had missed something. I missed this little mark up here, and it changed this word here. Let me blow this up a little bit. But it changed it to Kerm, to Groan, Rama, and then in Whale, W-A-I-L. You know, they both read, all three of these words read backwards, start with an A. It's the in Whale. And then the dot here gives you 2 W's or 2 Vavs. And so it's away. Then come back and read this, W-A-Y-U, W-A-Y. In Whale, away, hatchet. The hatchet, and then here, W-A-V-V-N-I. In hatchet waving of her come yell, ball in vest cockajos. So this next line goes in Satan, and it starts by explaining the power of the planets, and this is, you know, how they wage. You know, the line here has you read this pretty much just 2 times, how they wage. You know, why they wage the juice, the J-I-U-S, or they, E-Y, they juice, you know, their juice, how they wage their juice. And so all this astrology came from the Vedic. And you can look up a book called Cory's Fragments. It's an ancient book. You can find it many places. It's archived many places. And I've read a couple of them, and there's a couple of them a little bit different, have some differences in them. But it's a bunch of ancient fragments from ancient authors and historians in here that were found and weren't in any other books, and they put them all together here. It explains a lot of things, but it still has it's still coded a little bit. Maybe not necessarily coded, but some of the misinterpretations are not necessarily misinterpretations, but you know, the meaning of the words changed. It's a great book. Got some really interesting stuff in it on the origin and progress and results of the hieroglyphic and cuneiform decipherment. You see down here on page 33 of the preface, you can see that these writers understood these points down here. They were still using them. But he says here, in the same manner that Theodotus, you know, Theo is the Greek for God, the God, dot, us, Dotus is, they say Dotus is the knowledge in Hebrew, and maybe the Greek rendering of the common Phoenician name, Baal-Itin, you know, B-O-L-I-T-T, and then the final N is actually read as M. They say, and it means Baal, gives. Anything with the T in the end, they'll say means gives. But yeah, the Baal-Itin, you know, gives the knowledge. You know, Baal being an ancient word, they say is war, and sometimes they say it's Lord. And so as a Lord, you know, it's a Baal, a planet, you know, a Theo, a god, a planet. But this final TN in here, you know, all the final letters, they have a different style. These 5 final letters, and they have different meanings to them. And an M means it's an S, and it looks more like the S. And so it kind of, you can't have a final M sound, because anytime you put the final M up there, it sounds like an S. So in order to give a final M sound, they use the N, the final N, and gives it the M sound. And that's where we get our word time. Time comes from this T, the mark, and then N is the cycle, a mark of a cycle. The cycles is time, and so it's pronounced as an M. And so time used to be spelled TN, and it was pronounced time. And you also see that in this ancient Egyptian letter hieroglyph chart, that their letter for N was the same as everybody else's letter for M. So it meant the cycles, but pronounced as the M, the water. So that gives us the ball at time, the planets. And in the Indian, that would be Saturn. They were on a 60-year cycle. And down here on page 2, you see this word, Zophasimum, as in Sophie, as in wisdom. It's spelled with the Xupi, as in Sophie or wisdom. And this word here, the dot and the S gives it the 2S, and the dot up here makes it E, and it's the same word on the first page of Genesis that they say is the heavens. This'em is. The wisdom, this'em is. The wisdom of the heavens is what that means. And you see here on the next page, this is that same word. They give the X, the TS here. It's wisdom, it's Sophie of Hashemim, or this'em is, the way I like to pronounce that. Observers of heaven, they'll call it. Sophie, came down to mean wisdom, but it possibly just means to observe, which is wise. And they were formed similar to the shape of an egg. They knew the shape of the galaxy, and they knew the shape of orbits many thousand years ago. Nobody ever believed we lived on a flat planet. And it says here, that the god of the wind taught men fire, and when the violent tempest of winds and rains came, and the boughs of the trees entire, being rubbed against each other, took fire and burnt the wood there. And Usos, having taken a tree and lopped off his boughs, was the first man who dared to venture upon it, on the sea. And he consecrated 2 stellar pillars to fire and wind, and he worshipped them and poured out them. And you can see here they use the same word, stellas or pillars. And this is what it's talking about in the bottom of chapter 3 of Genesis, when it was Tubal-Cain and his brothers and sister had written the knowledge on the pillars, the knowledge of hunting and fishing. And of these were begotten 2 brothers, the inventors of iron and the manifold use of it. And one of these called Chryser, that was Tubal-Cain, the Vulcan. And Kronos offered up his son as the sacrifice to his father, the heaven, and circumcised himself, and compelled his allies to do the same. And not long afterwards he consecrated after his death another son named Muth, who he had by Rhea. The Phoenicians called him Death and Pluto. As you know, that's the story of Abraham and Isaac. But being that it was after his death, that would fit Isis and Osiris. And so the god of death is Pluto, or Muth. Mut is the Hebrew word they always give death. And it's because Pluto's Mut. It doesn't have a tone. And the daughter of Uranus and Ge are heaven and earth, and wife of Kronos or Saturn. And so that would give this death, a daughter of heaven and earth and wife of Saturn. And so that would be Pluto or Mut or death. And this is the ones that get mixed up here. You have Bina here on Saturn and wisdom, and they mix up the tail and the head of the dragon here. And they mix up all 3. And in Hebrew this would be Balt, B-O-L-T, the wife of Baal. The T is the Et in the Egyptian. The T marks the feminine of the gods. same as in moot and deaf, the T at the end. And so these writers, they don't claim to know everything. They're talking about how they're trying to figure it out because it was strange then. And so this book is fragments of many ancient writers, historians. And on page 36 it'll tell the story about the voyage of Hannah, commander of the Carthaginians. And it'll tell the story about how they sailed, past the Straits of Gibraltar and into the Med, and then up a river to a sea that was in the middle of Africa. And this has been at least 7,000 years ago, they say, when that sea was in the middle of Africa. Down here at page 95 was a Greek writer, Abidenas, Abi, the father Dinas. That's where your word dean comes from. And in the Hebrew, they'll often give it the teacher. He was a Greek writer contemporary with the disciple of Berosus, the Chaldean, about 268 BC. He wrote History of the Chaldean Empire, fragments which are preserved to us in the writings of Eusebius, Crilius, and Cincillus. Some regard him as the same person as Palaphadus, who was also an Abidenas. It's not a name, but it's a title. It's the father, the Abbey teacher. And so the Megasthenes, the great mega, the great Stenis, looks like where your word stencil comes from, a copier, Greek historian and geographer, who was sent an ambassador to India about 295 BC. On his return, wrote a book on India, which unfortunately perished. Everything was burnt. All the libraries were burnt. Then on page 121, it'll talk about the 21st dynasty. And the one that ruled there the longest, 46 years, was this Pishuanes, or Pisunises. And this is where your word pseudonym come from. Everything in Greek start with the PSU. They'll say it means lies. And in the Hebrew, they'll give it the PSOU is rebelled, or the PSO transgression. Rebelled, raid, rebelled, transgressed, has spread, transgressing. Or the pisser being the interpretation. Pisser, and pissra, and pissies, transgression, interpretations. And Pishu, that's the breaker, the code breaker. Oh, Pishi. That would be me, the Dean Pishu, the teacher of the break. And this little mark above the E, you see how they put the N on the other side? And that tells me if that's what that mark means, is to grab this letter. So it's probably the Pisus, and then N-E-N-E-S would be proper with the two N's on each side of the E. The turning. And so this Hebrew letter Pei is one of the double letters. It comes with or without the dot. And so I'm going to start looking at it a little closer, because they didn't have a psi in the Hebrew, but it's possibly the P or the Q with the dot in it. And I'm going to look at it a little closer and might find something. Down at page 128, 129, Mantheo says that it wasn't until the shepherds had departed, the shepherd kings, the Hyksos that were running Egypt, and till they departed to Jerusalem, that the country of Egypt took its name. It was never known as Egypt before that. From Sethosi. I'm not going to pronounce that final S as if this was French. The IS is just the E. It was called also Egyptus. Then down page 136, get into the old Egyptian chronicles, the Time Chronicle. So down page 153 starts the Indian fragments from the Mega, from the Megas, the Great Stennis. So down here at page 167 of the Indian astronomy from the Paschal Chronicle, about the time of the construction of the Tower of Babel, a certain Indian of the race of Arphaxad made his appearance, a wise man and an astronomer whose name was Endabarius. It was he who first instructed the Indians in the science of astronomy. And in one of these books, they went out of their way to say this is not the same Arphaxad that was the son of Shem. But it was the same time after the flood, about the time of the building of the Tower of Babel. Arphaxad was born 1 year after the flood. And you can see that the name of Shem is the same word. They'll say it means name and sometimes just things. But it's N, and the little mark here lets you know that this read N-I, N, and then N-I, and then S-E, in nice, and then S-O-I-L, in nice soil. And then the J-O, and then this is M-L, and then S this way. Jamils, in nice soil, Jamils, and that's definitely Indian name, Jamil. And then this isn't Ash and Ashur, this is was, W-A-S and then E-S-U-R, was Ashur, of war, of warp, W-A-R-P, and then 2 P's, P-K-S, war packs. And the little mark here tells you that stops there, and the D goes with the next word. The war packs, delude. This is where your word deluge come from. Delude, wars, to avoid. So if that dot in the P makes that the psi, it would be wars packs. Eluded wars, which makes a lot of sense. And that's only one of the reasons that we're going to associate this, how they wage their juice, this astrology, to the Vedic astrology. But the main reason is all these ancient images of Moses, he has horns. In churches, in old Bibles, Moses always has horns. Even in the pictures in the old Bibles, he's always got horns. This is the way Christians pictured Moses. And that's because Moses was born with horns, and that's how he got his name. All the names have a meaning. But when the Pharaoh's daughter went to bathe and found the ark among the reeds, and she opened it and saw the little boy child, and it became her son, so she called his name Mush. Just a M, a S, and a E. M, a S-H-E, Mush. And this is Mush. It's the Indian symbol of Aries, the goat. And this is the one that the Indians celebrate as Easter, the first month, starting middle of April. And so I run up on all this, on this word, and he said, this is the book of Job. It's older than all the rest of the Bible. And it starts with this word, Vayam, which is the V-I-Y-A, or the V-Y-I-A, Vayam. And this part of the word, in Arabic, they'll say it means to speak unintelligible, or, not understood. But this part of the word here, the Vaya, is the word used mostly in the Bible when it says, and he said. And it's the 20th year of the 60-year cycle of Tamil calendar. And this is the ancient calendar that Arphaxad had taught them. And it's a 60-year cycle, and it works as, Saturn has a 30-year orbit, and Jupiter has a 12-year orbit, so they come back to the same place in 60 years. And it started here in 87, 88, which appears to be the time that Saturn is in Libra, this Virgo, Scorpio, Libra. And they start this clock when the sun is over here in Pisces. So I'm sure that when they started this clock, they had Jupiter and Saturn in the same place. And so it's the base of the clock. There's 60 minutes across here. And when Saturn goes around twice, Jupiter go around 5 times. And so all this ancient Vedic astrology was based on this. So I'll leave y'all the link to this archive, Cory's Fragments, and it's not the only one. And if you just Google Cory's Ancient Fragments PDF, you'll find many places you can look at it, or online read. You find it in many places, and they're not all the same. Some of them are added stuff, some have extras, some are missing things, because many people had went over this, interpret these fragments. And I'm going to start reading here at line 6 in this next movie. And we're going to get down here and find the real word, that's Satan, and find the real meaning to it, which comes up here in line 9. And it's going to have a link back up here to this hatchet waving. Alright, I'm going to cut this off here. Good day.